but I'm going to go through it orally. I'm going to give you some main ideas, and you guys are going to write them out. You're going to write out 14 different context paragraphs. I know that feels like a lot of work, but guess what? The AP exam is in 10 days. And if you can't come up with a context paragraph for each of these topics, you're not ready. You're just not ready, because this is what the AP exam will cover. So you should take notes either in a notebook. You can take notes here. You can open the quiz right now if you want to do it on your computer and listen to me while I talk and type while I talk. That's up to you. You can do, there's a lot of ways to record this information, but I want to go through each of these, and I'm going to do some cold calling and asking you guys a key term for each one of these topics. Okay? So we're going to start from the beginning. We're going to go through each one. I'm going to check the chat once more right before I get started. Looks like everything is about the AP clinic mostly. So yeah, we'll find a new time for the AP clinic. Maybe it'll be tomorrow, or we'll push it back to like 4 o'clock or something. Okay. Okay, so you guys should be taking notes as I talk through all of these. I'm not giving you a written version, because if you all have a written version and it's exactly the same, and you all write that on the 21st, there's a chance they could look at your test and be like, oh, you guys all wrote down the same thing. Like your teacher must have been helping you on exam day, or you were helping each other. So we don't want the exact same language for every one of these context paragraphs, but you do want the main ideas. So we're ready to go? Feeling good? Someone give me a yes, that I know that you're with me. All right, Ayana, thank you. All right. I'm going to go back to close this, and we'll walk through these. You're taking notes. If you get a topic on the post-classical trade, thanks, Brianna. If you get a topic on post-classical trade, anything about Indian Ocean and 1200 to 1450, what should your context be about? What should you introduce before you talk about trade in the post-classical era? Someone give me a suggestion in the chat box. I'm not going to give you an answer until I get at least one suggestion in the chat box. Thanks, Suzelle. You should talk about the trade routes. You could also potentially talk about religion. So here's what I would write for a post-classical trade context paragraph. You open the DBQ, you look at it, it's like, oh, this is about post-classical trade. This is about trade 1200 to 1450. My context paragraph is going to sound something like this. In the classical era, several trade routes emerged that were very important for interregional trade. The Silk Roads, the Indian Ocean, the Mediterranean trade route. Those all existed during the classical era. And the two most important of those trade routes were the Silk Roads and the Indian Ocean that connected empires like Rome and Han China. When the classical empires collapsed, trade stopped for all intents and purposes. But then, in the post-classical era, new empires emerged that reinvigorated trade on those same trade routes. The Silk Roads was reinvigorated. The Indian Ocean trade route was reinvigorated by new empires like the Islamic caliphates, like the Mongols, like the Sui and Tang and Song dynasties, like the Byzantines. So you could mention any of those empires that reignited trade during the post-classical era. I love this idea of also mentioning that in the classical era, religion spread on trade routes like Christianity and Buddhism. And in the post-classical era, religion also spread on trade routes like Islam. That's what I would talk about. So basically that in the classical era, trade was, interregional trade, long distance trade was very important, but because those empires collapsed, trade stopped, but then trade starts again with the post-classical era with new empires invigorating trade. Okay, next one, rise and spread of Islam. What should you talk about if you're introducing the idea of Islam? You open your computer, you click on the documents. The documents are about Islam in 1200 to 1450. Okay, chemist, you said caliphates. That could be part of it. Trade style, Muhammad. Good, Nazra. You don't have to share privately if you don't want to. You can share with everybody. Yeah, I would definitely mention Muhammad. So the rise of spread in Islam. Again, this is context. This is not a thesis. Islam emerged after Muhammad, the founder of Islam, met with the angel Gabriel, whatever information you know about the founding of Islam, that it was found by Muhammad, that it's a monotheistic religion, that it's very similar to Christianity and Judaism, that it spread through trade, that it spread through conquest, that the rulers of Islamic empires were known as caliphs. That's all excellent background to the rise and spread of Islam. So definitely, if you mention Muhammad, the year is around the 7th century. So between 600 and 700, around 620, Islam is founded. It is monotheistic, the 5 pillars of Islam. It's spread through trade and conquest. All of that is an excellent introduction to the rise and spread of Islam. So if you see a DBQ about Islam, you should mention Muhammad. You should mention that it's monotheistic. You should mention that it's spread through trade and conquest. Okay, Mongols, what should you introduce? What should you say if you get a... Yeah, good. Okay, you guys are on the right track. Then I want you to memorize these. I want you to be ready for any of these topics. If you open the DBQ on May 21st and say, oh, this is about the Mongols, sweet, I'm ready for this. The Mongols were started by Genghis Khan, right? They are nomadic. They come out of the mountains. They used horses. They had yams and yasa. I think you guys know so much about the Mongols. You don't want to use everything in your context paragraph. You only need 2 sentences to introduce the Mongols. They're nomadic, started by Genghis Khan. They conquer the largest civilization, the largest land empire known in the history of the world was the Mongol land empire. If you introduce a couple of those things, you get the context point. Yes, I love how much you guys know about the Mongols in the chat box. Good. Okay, now we're into period 4, maritime empires and European exploration. Spanish, Portuguese, British, French, Dutch. Okay, they're getting a little more complicated now. How would we introduce European exploration or the European maritime empires? Brianna, good. Not 1592, 1492. Yep, you corrected it before I said it. Yes, what motivates European exploration? Search for spices, demand for spices. You guys got this. Mansa Musa, you guys got this. So if you see a prompt, I'm going to keep saying this for everyone. I want you to imagine sitting down at your computer on May 21st, getting your computer booted up, you're ready to go, you're nervous, you're excited. You click on that document to get started. You see the prompt, you see the first document. It's about European exploration. It's early modern. It's about the Portuguese or the Spanish or the British or the French. And you're like, yes, I was hoping for this one because I know what context I need to write. I need to write about how Europeans wanted direct trade routes with Asia. They wanted those direct trade routes with Asia, maritime trade routes with Asia, because In 1453, the Ottomans conquered Constantinople, and Europeans lose their Christian Byzantine connection to the Silk Road. They don't like trading with Muslims, Ottomans. They want to trade with Christians. They don't like the prices that the Ottomans are charging them. They want direct connection to Asia, so they start searching for those connections to Asia by sea. You could, yes, you could name Prince Henry the Navigator. He starts sponsoring sea exploration. I see some of you mention Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa and the stories of his wealth encourage Europeans to start exploring the coast of Africa. They use post-classical technology borrowed from Asia, the compass and the astrolabe. If you mention any of those things, all you need is 2 sentences, 2 specific on-point sentences, and you get the context point. So to say that again, Europeans want a direct connection to Asia. They want a direct maritime connection to Asia to get luxury goods, spices, silk, porcelain. They wanted that because in 1453, Constantinople fell, and so they lost their Christian middlemen, who were the Byzantines. Prince Henry the Navigator and others sponsored exploration by sea using compass, astrolabe, technology that Europeans acquired from the Middle East and East Asia. That's good. Okay, land-based gunpowder empires, the Ottoman, Mughal, Russia, Qing, Safavid. You open the document. Yeah, thank you, Brianna. I see your message. Land-based gunpowder empires. So how would I introduce these empires? How would I introduce a question about any of these empires? If the DBQ is about how these empires ruled, how they governed, etc. Yeah, you guys have a lot of good ideas here. I love this chat box that I see filling up. What I would introduce if it was a question about land-based empires is I would name some of these empires. I would say, okay, in the early modern period, several land-based empires emerged. They all depended on gunpowder technology. They all depended on gunpowder technology that they borrowed from East Asia. And they, I think you guys said it here, they expanded using a couple of, or they controlled their empires using a couple different methods. In some cases, they used forced conversion. In other cases, they used religious tolerance. They expanded and controlled through cultivating loyalty or asserting authority. But basically, if you get a question about land-based gunpowder empires, you need to say that they're all land-based. Several of them were Muslim, but they were also Christian. You could just name them and say, okay, the Ottoman and Mughal are Muslim land-based empires. Russia was a Christian land-based empire. Safavid was also Muslim. And then you had the Qing, who conquered the Ming dynasty. So if you just name a couple and kind of say what kind of empire they are, that could earn you the context point. Also that they all depended on gunpowder weapons that they acquired from East Asia. If you said that, that would get you a context point too. And a lot of you here have mentioned something about they used a combination of religious tolerance or forced conversion. All of that would be a good start to an essay about any of these empires. Also, interesting to note, the Ottoman, the Mughal, and the Qing are all, they all kind of descend from nomadic warriors, kind of like the Mongols too. That would be an interesting way to introduce them. The Ottoman, Mughal, and Qing are all kind of outsiders who then come to power and defeat the post-classical empires. The Qing defeat the Ming, the Mughal defeat the kind of Hindu kingdoms, and the Ottomans defeat the Byzantines. Okay, we're getting through it. We're almost halfway there. Columbian Exchange. Columbian exchange, this is almost exactly the same as maritime empire. So I'm going to ask someone else. What would be the 3 bullet points you would say for Columbian exchange? What leads us to the Columbian exchange? What gets us to the Columbian exchange? So diseases impact. Population decreasing is impact. That's all what happens because of the Columbian exchange. Yes. Okay, now we're getting it. Exploration, exploration. This is the same as the maritime empire one. You want to write about search for maritime routes to Asia. You want to mention Christopher Columbus. You want to mention the fall of Constantinople. Any of those things that lead Europeans to searching for new routes to Asia, and then they don't show up in Asia, they arrive in the Americas instead. And then there's going to be all kinds of impacts because of that, like death of Native Americans due to disease, like population growth in Europe and America and Africa and Asia due to corn and potatoes. You guys know everything you need to know about the Columbian exchange, but how do you introduce it? Same story as European maritime empires. Columbus is searching for a new route to Asia. He's using navigational technology borrowed from the East Asia, from the Chinese, compass and astrolabe. Instead of arriving in Asia and India, he arrives in the Americas, thinks he's in Asia. That launches a new interconnected system of exchange, biological exchange known as the Columbian exchange. Okay. Atlantic system. This one's going to be similar. It's going to be similar. What's the background for the Atlantic system? Okay, chemists are saying slaves traded to the Americas, cotton, etc. traded. Yep, so you know the key components of it. That's good. You need to know the Atlantic system. How would you introduce it? There you go. Good, Tamara. Good, Noelia. So this is a similar story. Europeans tried to get to Asia. Instead, they arrive in the Americas. Disease wipes out 50 to 90% of the population. 50 to 90% of the population gets wiped out. And they realize that the cash crops like sugar and tobacco grow really well in the Americas, and they can make a lot of money if they bring in laborers to grow that stuff. So they look towards Africa. Exactly. Good. So you guys know that one. Same story. Europeans trying to get to Asia, they don't get to Asia. They arrive in the Americas instead. With them come diseases. Those diseases wipe out Native American labor force. Europeans look to Africa to get labor to grow cash crops. Excellent. CCOT, trade and global trade. So here you want to talk about same. Navigational technology leads to global trade, but it comes after the discovery of the Americas. What truly leads to global trade is the silver trade. So here is where you want to mention the mine of Potosi. The Spanish arrive in the Americas. They exploit the Inca and the Aztec. They conquer them. And then they discover that there are these incredible silver mines in the Americas. And they have ships called galleons that take the silver from the Americas and take it all the way across the Pacific to Asia. This global, the new arrival of silver from the Americas opens up Ming China, which had been isolated. Ming China starts to trade again. They thought they were the Middle Kingdom, that they didn't need to trade. And they say, oh, there's so much silver out there that these Spanish have, we should start trading again. So if you mention my 3 bullet points would again be Europeans discover silver in the Americas. Europeans use that silver to open up trade with Asia, and then we get our first global trade system. The other thing about global trade, it could be about Indian Ocean trade, which you guys wrote a DBQ about. So you could address that the Indian Ocean, Europeans arrive in the Indian Ocean trying to get direct connection to Asia. Vasco da Gama arrives. They use the same technologies, compass, astrolabe, etc. Okay. I'm going to toss this one back to you. Enlightenment ideas. What do you need to talk about to introduce the Enlightenment ideas? Okay, a lot of you are naming some of those ideas. What's government like before the Enlightenment? There you go. All right. Yes, Irina. Yes, Denial. Yes, Chemist. Yes, Denestle. To introduce the Enlightenment, you have to talk about absolute monarchy. You have to say, okay, for all of time, since the first civilizations were founded after the Neolithic Revolution, the very first civilizations, from the beginning, humans have found themselves using the same type of government structure, and that's monarchy. Someone at the top has all the power, someone at the top makes all the decisions. And it's been that way for thousands of years until the Enlightenment comes around. And these Enlightenment philosophers, and then I love those of you who mentioned some philosophers, these Enlightenment philosophers introduce new ideas that go against the idea of absolute monarchy. John Locke says we should have natural rights. Rousseau said we should have popular sovereignty. Voltaire says we should have freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Montesquieu said we should have separation of powers. If you say that, you got the context point, no problem. You could then name some revolutions that it leads to. Great. Okay, early modern revolutions. This is going to be very similar. What's everyone sick of in these revolutions? If you see a DBQ about French Revolution, Haitian Revolution, Latin American revolutions, or the American Revolution, what's everyone sick of? Yes, they're all sick of absolute power. They're all sick of absolute monarchies. In Haiti, they're sick of monarchies and they're sick of slavery. And so all of these early modern revolutions were inspired by the Enlightenment, and they were inspired by the abuses of absolute monarchy, the abuses of slavery. If you mention that, you get the context point. Okay, we're almost done. We only got 4 more to go. Industrialization. This is the one you just did. You had a prompt on Japan and Russia. It was a very specific DBQ, but the topic is big. The topic is industrialization. How should you introduce any DBQ about industrialization? I see it in the text box. I see it. Yes, industrialization begins in the early modern era in Britain. That's how you start a context paragraph about any essay about industrialization. You just say, oh, in the early modern in the early modern era, not early modern, in the modern era, this incredible new transformation happened, known as industrialization. Industrialization began in Britain. Britain had a few advantages that helped it industrialize first. It had access to coal and iron, geographic advantage. It had a lot of rivers, so it had water-powered factories before it had coal-powered factories. It had a lot of clever engineers. So I see chemists, you said something about engines, factories. You could say it had inventors who came up with the idea of the steam engine. The steam engine was invented in Great Britain. And then you could also mention that Britain had the advantage of war capitalism. They had tons of money because they had exploited the Americas. They'd exploited Africa through the Atlantic system for hundreds of years by the time industrialization rolled around. Good. So it starts in Britain. That's all. And then it starts in Britain, and then it spreads from Britain to Europe. It spreads from Britain to the United States in a kind of a natural progression. And then other places have to do it through government intervention. That's what happened in Russia and Japan. The government said, oh, we're not keeping up with Britain and the United States. We better industrialize by choice, by design, government-led industrialization. Okay, imperialism. This is today's lecture, content lecture. What is the cause of imperialism? What leads up to imperialism? And yeah, mercantilism. Scrabble for Africa is an example of imperialism. Yes, to Nestle, it's demand for raw materials and demand for what? If you've been in my class, I say imperialism has two motivations, two main ones: demand for raw materials and demand for markets. Thanks to the Nile. We need a lot of things like rubber in our factories, and then we want to sell all the stuff we make in our factories back to the people we conquer. So you could say imperialism, my context would be something like this. In the modern era, Europe industrialized before any place else, led by Britain. Britain industrialized first, the rest of Europe followed. These industrialized countries needed raw materials and they wanted markets to sell their finished products. So they start looking for other places to conquer, to acquire raw materials, and to find new markets to sell their goods. This leads to imperialism. Europeans want to conquer Africa. They want to conquer East Asia. This leads to the scramble for Africa. You could bring that in if you want, but remember, you don't want to put too much in your context because you can't get outside evidence and context for the same thing. So you want to keep your context relatively short, a couple sentences. Don't put everything you know in the context paragraph. Save some of it for outside evidence. Your context for responses to imperialism is exactly the same. It's exactly the same. The thesis for responses to imperialism is either you reform or you fight back or you get conquered. Those are the three options. We're going to talk about those in the content lecture tomorrow. But the background, the context is industrialization. Industrialization in Europe leads to imperialism. Europeans are searching for raw materials and markets. And what gives them the big advantage that allows them to conquer Africa? What gives them the advantage that allows them to conquer Asia? Even more specific. Yes, DJ. It's not gun. Gunpowder goes all the way back to period 3. What specific weapons do industrial nations have that allow them to conquer Africa and Asia? Machine guns, the Maxim gun, and steam-powered gunboats. You want to name those two in this context about imperialism too. That industrialization gives Europeans advanced industrial weapon technology. Maxim gun, steam-powered gunboats. Good. Okay, last one is global migration. What causes global migration? What causes global migration? Yes, people migrated to cities to work in factories. Yes, people moved from one place to another to work in factories. So what's the base cause of global migration? Industrialization. Thank you, Genesis. This is about industrialization as well. And what transportation vehicles are used to help people move more easily? Trains and steamboats. You could also mention the canals, Panama and Suez. Okay, we did it. That only took us, that took us 40 minutes, but now you have all the answers you need for all 14 topics. I want you to write a context paragraph for all 14 topics so that on May 21st, when you look at the DBQ and you identify the topic, you have a context ready to go. You need all 14 of these ready to go. Memorize them, write them out, send them to me so I can check them and I can say, hey, that looks great. You're ready to go. You got that memorized. Okay? You guys were awesome in the chat box. You guys know a lot. You guys have a lot of key terms in your head. Just keep practicing. We got 10 days. We got 10 days. It's going to be great. I got time for any questions you have, any clarifications.
Okay.
Hi.
I sent the work to you.
What's that, Ruben?
I sent my work to you.
The classwork isn't working?
Yeah, I sent it to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Anyone else have a question? All right, guys. I'm getting a couple questions that I'll answer on chat. If you have any other questions, you can unmute yourself and ask me. Other than that, you're free to go. Just remember to do this. I'm going to look at all of your context paragraphs. So you need to write 14 context paragraphs, okay? Write them out. It's good practice. Everyone needs to do it. It's not due until tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon even. Okay, so get it done.